Well, Salah let us know what quarterback is under the tree for the Washington Commanders game. Excellent. We'll dive into that and some of his comments about championship roster building or whether the Jets should just blow the whole thing up. All right, well, let's get into it.
Zoinks! It is unequivocally the Super Bowl for New York Jet fans.
Field Yates, baby. Field gosh darn Yates. Let's bring him on the show.
Come on, people. Connor Rogers is joining the show. What's up, Connor? But Trevor gosh darn Sycamore, baby, for me, personally, my favorite New York Jet of all time.
Wow, it's great to be on. What an intro that was right there.
Paul, nobody does an intro like you, man.
Paul, you give the best intro of literally any podcast that I've ever.
I'm gonna lose my gosh darn bananas.
Hey, God bless. How we doing, everybody? Paul Ashton Jr. here, a.k.a. Boy Green. We're less than a week from Christmas, which means I'm really going to check if I finished all that Christmas shopping. More on that later, but welcome to Boy Green Daily, a daily New York Jets video show live every single friggin' day at 7:30. That's what daily means, in case you guys were wondering. Anywho, our guest on today's show, about damn time, it's been too damn long, and a random Ashton Davis email reconnected the dots. Phenomenal. So without further ado, let's bring her in. One of the best in the business. One of my faves. I love it. I love chatting, love arguing, love conversating, love just being in her presence. She's got a good vibe going on. So let's see if everyone else feels the same way. Rivka Board of JetsXFactor.com. Good morning, Rivka.
Good morning. It's good to see you again. Yes, yeah. I did send that random message about Ashton Davis.
Yeah. And I'm going to be honest, you're the only one that has, but I'm glad someone remembered. I'm kind of like waiting around like, so is someone going to compliment me or what? So finally, it's like one of those, investments, right? I heard Matthew Berry is a fantasy football guy, and he talked about Cordero Patterson. Apparently, like he had this high praise for Cordero Patterson at the beginning of his career, and then things didn't go well as a first round pick for the Vikings. But then he had that pop like last year for the Falcons, and he said, I was always right. It was just kind of a late blooming thing. So like I was always right. It was just, kind of a late blooming thing. So hopefully the Jets re-sign him. He's been man, I know you're an analytical person. You do the efficiency numbers. Right? If he's doing this and this snaps, you kind of expand that out, extrapolate some of those numbers. He's the greatest football player of all time, basically. I mean, yeah.
If you can really do anything with stats, then you can do that. But no, Michael Nania wrote an article, I think a week or two ago, talking about how Ashton Davis might be able to, if not replace Jordan Whitehead outright, certainly take some of those snaps. And the thing you can see about Davis is it's apparent that he does his best work in the box. The Jets have been using sort of in their big nickel package, which is, to me, it's like, even if you plan on using big nickel, you can re-sign him next year and have him play that third linebacker spot. He's probably not going to come that expensive, and the Jets need, cheaper good players. So my personal preference would be to re-sign Chuck Clark to play Whitehead's role and to re-sign Davis to play the big nickel, and especially to get Jamie Sherwood off the field. So I'd rather put Davis into that position, which the reason I reached out to you is because I felt if I'm going to take credit when things don't work out, or things I predicted don't work out, like Dalvin Cook, then I'm going to also admit when there's something that I said that does work out and that I thought would not. So that's why I reached out about Ashton Davis, because I was the one who said not a shot. So
I'll how fair is that though? Right?
Yeah, I can be wrong. I can be wrong. Look, I wrote last year after the season, I wrote I actually originally called it mea culpa, meaning, I'm wrong, but that we changed the title a bit, but it's when John Franklin Myers, I kept screaming all season about how they had to push him inside more and they were doing something really stupid and things like that. But then when you kind of look at the numbers and you look at the film, it's like they had a good reason for doing it, and the way they use him has made sense. So I said Ulbrich is using the right formula, and I was wrong.
Well, let me ask you. Actually, I didn't even have this on my docket, but you brought up a JFM. That was kind of a little buzzy thing of the last couple of days, combining a bunch of kind of insider nuggets. There has been a thought, a potential, as we're kind of looking into next year with the playoffs being eliminated and all for the 13th year in a row, that the Jets, as we naturally look, okay, how could the Jets make some money? What are some cat moves they could make to add some money to the piggy bank? And Zach Rosenblatt said if the Jets want to re-sign Bryce Huff, maybe John Franklin Myers could be a guy that they move. He said it's unlikely. He thinks that he's going to stay, but he's just trying to figure out the math of it. He said, oh, maybe he's a guy. And then on Rich Cimini's podcast, he said something similar. Wow, his number is way too big. They're going to have to do something there, whether it's a restructure or a trade perhaps, or cut or something. Are you at all willing to dance in those waters? Is that crazy? Where do you stand on the JFM thing heading into next year? And plus Bryce Huff, obviously.
Yeah, so I'm not sure when the JFM tweets were coming out. I have to say I wrote an article about that last week. That, talking about Bryce Huff and how if the Jets will re-sign him and how they would make the money work. And what I wrote is the one way that they could try to make the money work is to trade JFM. There's no way that you can that it's worth releasing him. He's too good of a player. I don't know if they can. I didn't look at the details. I don't know if they can easily restructure him because they already restructured him last year.
Right.
I do think he has a pretty high base salary, which means they probably could do something. But first of all, again, it's just kicking the can down the road even further, although the Jets seem fine with doing that, considering that they have Rodgers. But I think it's also less than it was because they already restructured him, which means they've already converted some of his salary into a bonus, which means there's just less maneuverability. I personally, I did write, I said, if the Jets want to re-sign Huff, pass rushers with that kind of pedigree. If you look at Montez Sweat, Montez Sweat has a lot more sacks than Huff, but Huff is a much better pressure guy. And so if Montez Sweat got, I don't remember what it was. I think it was
4-year 90? I'll
98. So it was almost 20
98,
million.
yes.
No, 20, almost 25 million a year.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
He got
Mm-hmm.
24.5 million. If he got that, Bryce Huff is probably looking in that range. Maybe slightly lower because he doesn't have the same
straight up production
track record or just the straight up production. But NFL teams, if you remember how what the Jets gave Carl Lawson. Lawson was a similar type in terms of wreaking a lot of havoc, not necessarily racking up the sacks. Similar situation where they both have short arms, which is the main reason why they don't get a ton of sacks. But if you remember what the Jets paid a few years ago, Huff is going to get close to $25 million a year. Even if the Jets did trade JFM, I think they could save around $14 million this year with $2 million dead. It's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
So even if they did that, they would need. Now the only thing is Huff, if he did sign an extension that he re-signed, that first year would probably have a very low cap number, since that's how teams usually maneuver their contracts. That was the whole thing about extending Quinnen, was that you usually can lop off some money from the first year, or even 2 years sometimes if teams have that small window, and then all the money's backloaded. So technically the Jets could do that. Potentially they could even do that and keep JFM, maybe restructure him also. But it's hard for me to see them keeping both guys. And I just have this sense that they're going to end up keeping JFM and trying to tag and trade Huff. Tagging him is definitely worthwhile one way or another, even if the Jets don't plan on actually re-signing him, because the tag I think is I don't remember exactly the number, but it was in the 20 to 20
19 something. And change, but it changes every year, of course. Slightly
so the projection for next season is somewhere around the 19 to 20 million mark, and that's a number definitely worth tagging him at. The thing is, if they can't come to an agreement, they could trade him. They can. I would be shocked if they couldn't get at least a second round pick plus more, and if not outright a first round pick for him, because that kind of production is very rare. That being said, I didn't look at the stats actually from the Sunday game. I've been a little behind on that just because of how demoralizing the game was. But in the previous 5 weeks, Huff had a pressure rate that was well below league average. So he started out being hyper efficient, And then as the season wore on, I haven't looked into it. The stats aren't necessarily publicly available about how much he's been double teamed, but it could be that they're double teaming him more. It could also be that he's slowing down, that as he gets more snaps, that he's not used to a full workload, and that's hurting him. It could also be that they're playing him not only in pass situations and he can't just pin back his ears and rush, even though the majority of his snaps have been pass rush snaps. They're not necessarily all in places where it's only a passing down. There are many different reasons. There could be many different reasons for that, but Huff has definitely slowed down. So the Jets, that's something they might want to keep in mind when they're deciding whether to re-sign him or not, particularly since they clearly don't trust him on rundowns.
So the way you're dancing, Rivka, the way we're on the dance floor right now and looking at each other, I feel like I know the next step you're about to do here. But so I know you mentioned a potential tag and trade. Would you advocate for that based on, I don't know, because you tag Huff regardless, because you don't want to lose a player, the position and the age and everything. So that makes sense to tag him. No question about it. But to avoid paying what will be that large number that you said. A lot of people have kind of been all over the place. Zach Rosenblatt, his piece said at least $15 million a year. Randy Mueller, the former NFL general manager, was more in your range a couple of months ago with Jake Asman saying 23, 24 million a year. So it's going to be wild numbers. Would you advocate the Jets trading him as opposed to paying him that sort of bag?
So at the bye week, and even a few weeks afterward, I was very much in the camp of extend Huff now. He's getting more expensive by the day, which is true. Once they didn't extend him and seeing him sort of fall off, I'm still not advocating for the tag and trade. I'd still prefer to see them keep him. But if they just determine that it doesn't work with their cap, I think the tag and trade is the only way to go. You definitely don't let him walk for a third-round comp pick, because you could get a lot more than that in a trade. So, unfortunately, I've had the sense that all along that the Jets are heading in that direction. There's just something about Douglas and Saleh or Ulbrich that don't quite trust Bryce Huff. It's unfortunate in a way, because Carl Lawson was sort of a similar type player, but he wasn't as bad against the run as Huff is. So I guess maybe because the Jets' run defense is an issue to begin with, they need their edges to play with more discipline. And not just run upfield to pass rush all the time. So it could be that. Look, I can't say that I would be happy if it happened. I'd be disappointed, and I'd be very upset if he ended up with another team and could really hurt the Jets. But I'm on the fence about it. I can't say that I would be terribly disappointed, particularly if they got back a first-round pick.
Again, we're speaking with Rivka Board here of JetsXFactor.com. All right, let's get into some of the solid comments yesterday. They were interesting. We'll start with the quarterback thing first. So Zach Wilson's the guy if he clears concussion protocol. We have a very limited sample size of people that have entered the concussion protocol within the same week and returned. Brock Purdy has broken that. Kenny Pickett in the early portion of last season was able to do it. So it's very rare, though. But so we'll see what happens. So if he's healthy, he's going to be the guy. If not, Trevor Siemian will be the guy against Washington. Happy Christmas Eve, everybody. Happy holidays. There you go. Under the tree. God bless. You're welcome. Rivka, I'm going to reveal a private conversation we had. It's funny because of the timing of you reaching out. We're like, oh, maybe Aaron Rodgers. That's what we'll be talking about. So I guess we'll start there, Rivka. Let's try to start higher.
So just in terms of it, Aaron Rodgers is not
activating him. Yeah.
I think the reports were last week that Rodgers' return was contingent upon whether the Jets won the game and they still had playoff hopes. Rodgers has equivocated enough. Meaning he kind of left himself opening. He said, "I'm only going to come back if I'm not risking my Achilles." At this point, and I'm pretty sure. I think he poo-pooed some of those reports about when he's going to come back, if he's going to come back. I think he'd be a fool to come back at this point. Even if they do activate him, I don't think maybe he'll play a snap to say I came back, or play a series or something. But it would be very foolish. Instead, what he should be doing is probably getting back off his feet as much as possible, or not off his feet, but going through more of a typical Achilles rehab, making sure that it doesn't come back it doesn't heal in a stretched position, making sure that he's in as good of a shape as possible for next season. Coming back when the Jets are eliminated would just not be a smart thing to do. So there you have it.
Zach Wilson, did you drink the Kool-Aid? Did you see the Texans game? And oh, cheers, everybody! Are like, boy, well, I know what's going to happen here. Because I see Rich Eisen all the time. He always says this. Anytime something really good happens to Jets, he's like, where's the other shoe? Where the hell is the other shoe? Like he just knows that it's coming, like some sort of mythical fortune teller. But we like all know what's going to happen there. So, were you willing after that to say, hey, if he goes on a little run here, we're bringing him back, or is he just totally gone? Is he totally traded, or if you can, or potentially cut this offseason? What's your take there?
So I don't have a very high opinion of Zach Wilson, and I haven't for a while now.
Yeah.
And I think
you remember change your mind.
You remember my preseason article about how, or before Hard Knocks, I said the pre-Hard Knocks narrative about don't believe all the things that you see about how well Zach Wilson's doing. It's all mirage. I stand by that statement. The thing is, I think one of the reasons I said it is to inoculate myself against that kind of thinking. And then, unfortunately, several times this year, I've fallen into the trap of thinking not that he's going to be their quarterback of the future, but maybe that they could keep him around, maybe they could develop him. But the thing is, he just so completely fell off that against Miami. And I understand the pass protection was terrible, and I understand there probably weren't open receivers. And yet, you look at how some quarterbacks look in their worst games and how other quarterbacks look in their worst games, and you just see the difference. I mean, Zach has no command of the offense, of the field. He has no clue what he's looking at. Yes, he had a good game against the Texans. Yes, he had a good game against the Chiefs. But if you look at his total body of work, their Jets cannot make the same mistake that they did last year again. I was screaming all offseason that the Jets needed to get a backup quarterback. I begged them, I think in May and June and July, get Teddy Bridgewater, get a different backup quarterback so that you're not relying on Zach Wilson. They said that they wanted to redshirt him. You can't redshirt a guy who's one injury away from getting on the field, particularly when you have that guy in front of him is 40 years old and you have a terrible offensive line. So it's just the planning in the first place was terrible. I'm not a believer in Zach Wilson. Maybe the Jets will be able to leverage those two games and trade him for something more than a conditional 7th round pick. But I thought that they should have tried to trade him this past offseason and just gotten whatever they could for him, like the 49ers traded Trey Lance for a 4th round pick. Getting a 4th round pick for Zach Wilson would be a coup.
Yeah, that's for sure. And a bigger one, perhaps the cap savings. If they're able to trade him, they'd save $5.5 million, as the contract is currently stated. Perhaps the Jets would have to eat some of that to acquiesce a potential deal. If they cut him, they eat all that in dead cap. Although I guess with the post-June 1 designation, they could spread it if they wanted to, spread the butter thin on the toast if they prefer. But the toast is the toast, so you're going to eat it one way or the other. I think ultimately is certainly the case there. You mentioned the offensive line. Good Lord have mercy. That was tough to watch as a Jets fan, no doubt about it. And as I looked at the offensive line and then looked to the sideline at Aaron Rodgers and then looked back to the offensive line, I'm like, oh, thank God he's not in there. So I ask you this, Rivka, as we're trying to find some positivity in a place that it doesn't seem to exist right now, is it realistic that in an off season here, where their 2 starting tackles from week 1 are both scheduled to be free agents, and then we just saw what we saw against Miami, that Joe Douglas or whoever's GMing this team, more on that in a minute, can magically wave their wand and this offensive line can be competent in front of Rodgers in 2024? Is that realistic? Is that possible from right now to what it could be in September?
So the biggest issue with that is that they need a number 2 receiver. That's the biggest problem, because the other needs that they have, like let's say on defense, they can figure out what they're going to do with Huff. If they did extend him, they could lower the cap hit in the first year. They're going to need a strong safety. Hopefully they don't double down on their mistake and bring back Jordan Whitehead. But other than that, on the offense, really the problem is that they need 2 tackles. I'm on the train of cutting Laken Tomlinson too. You can save almost $14 million by cutting him with a poster and first designation. So I think you can get, first of all, you can sign an effective tackle with most of that money. But second of all, if you really wanted to bring in just mid-range, I know people always say there's no such thing as those mid-range mediocre tackles that cost $5 million a year. Take a look at what George Fant is doing for Houston, even though the Jets kind of beat him up a bit. But take a look. He's playing competent football. Take a look at what I don't know how to pronounce the name, but Jermaine Eluemunor, whatever his name is, on the Raiders. Take a look at what he's done most of the season. Also, relatively small contract, was available for a while. you look at some of the names out there, and not all of them are going to get 13 plus million a year. Some of them are looking for a 1-year prove-it deal. Some of them sign in the second wave of free agency. If you're going to go that route, potentially you could get 2 new tackles that are going to hold down the fort. They don't have to be top tier tackles. You just need guys who are decent. Now, one counterpoint to that is that across the NFL, offensive line play has been very much deteriorating. Like if you look just at the numbers across the board, the pressure rates are worse. You know, it could be that PFF is counting pressure a little bit differently to account for the fact that it's worse, but it's worse across the board. And I mean, which would maybe tend to indicate that they've changed something, but you can just see it, like the tackle play across the league has not been good. So in that sense, getting a good tackle, you just want to pay whatever it takes to get that guy. It's going to be tough. It's definitely going to be tough. That's why I would say that the Jets probably need to use their first round pick on a tackle and hope that he can step in right away, which isn't, we've seen it in the past, but we've also seen it this year. None of the first round tackles are doing all that well. I think Broderick Jones might have been doing reasonably well, actually, but the guy the Jets gave up by making that pick swap. But I think DeJuan Jones was doing fairly well too, and that's a guy the Jets could have gotten. I think he was drafted
fourth
in the 4th round. So I was not necessarily on the DeJuan Jones train only because of how big he is and the Becton.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad reports about like how much he cares and stuff hovering around the draft.
I think he was playing fairly well for Cleveland before he got hurt. And speaking of teams, by the way, I just want to say something. I said this in my article yesterday. For those who are saying Joe Douglas gets a free pass because of all the injuries, I'm sorry. Cleveland lost Jack Conklin in the first week of the season. They lost their other tackle.
Jedrick Wills.
They lost Jedrick Wills to IR. They lost DeJuan Jones to IR. And look, they're managing, yes, their offense is not great or anything, but they managed to protect Joe Flacco. So, just
in the thick of the playoffs right now, yeah.
And just look what happens. Douglas doesn't get a free pass for the injuries because their tackles would have been atrocious regardless of the injuries. So, yeah, you want to tell me that it's not his fault that Connor McGovern got hurt? Fine, but Connor McGovern was also giving up a 6.1% pressure rate before he got injured. You want to tell me that they were stuck with Tomlinson? Yes, but Tomlinson is the one that Douglas signed for 3 years, $40 million when James Daniels and Austin Corbett were available for much less and played better than him. I know Corbett got hurt, but Daniels has played far better than Tomlinson. And and just the player evaluation there, the fact that they needed 2 new tackles, they needed to replace Dwayne Brown and Mekhi Becton, and they did not replace either of them. They were willing to go into the season with a competition between Max Mitchell and Billy Turner for their right tackle. Just the gross miscalculations that Douglas made. I always refer to this. Steve Cohen, Mets owner, said hope is not a strategy. Joe Douglas has made hope his strategy when it comes to the offensive line. And to me, that alone should be the reason that he gets fired. And I know you said we're going to get into it. I've been a big advocate of cleaning house.
Oof. Rivka, I'm going to just be honest. I don't know how often you watch this show when you're not on, but my father normally gives me a bunch of crap and then just highlights whoever our guests are. So he says this, and I didn't even know this was true. And now I'm just going to duck on myself here. Think about this fun fact. Dalvin Cook has 3 more yards rushing than Zach. I'm like, ha, that's funny. That's not. Oh, boy, that is true. Wow. Here are the rushing totals for the Jets this season. 637 yards rushing for Bryce Huff. Okay, that's fine. He's obviously been in a wild slump over this long period of time in terms of a rushing perspective, production-wise. Dalvin Cook, 214. Zach Wilson, 211. Oh, boy. Thanks, Dad. Really appreciate you supporting the show and saying, man, Rivka's a genius. Of course he is. We already knew that. But geez. So yeah, that's wow. Did you know that, Rivka? Did you know that?
No, I did not. I don't generally look at. I'm much more interested in how players get to their production than just their raw production itself. So I haven't been looking at Bryce. I actually haven't been watching a ton of film either. I'll get more into it because I'm curious how much of Bryce's slump is him and how much of it is the same thing we saw towards the end of last season. I kept insisting. I think I wrote it even twice in articles. I said I have a hot take. The Jets running game wouldn't have been any better if Bryce Hall had been in there for the second half of the season last year.
Wow.
And I think we're sort of seeing this year how I might have been right, because you can't run behind an offensive line that's getting you stuffed behind the line of scrimmage every time. Yeah, maybe Barry Sanders had the most stuffs in NFL history and also got tons of yardage. But okay, that was Barry Sanders. And also a lot of Barry Sanders' lost yards were his own fault of him of dancing around and trying to make something out of nothing instead of diving ahead, which I know Saleh criticized Bryce for somewhat. And maybe he's right. but Brees's numbers still wouldn't look any better. So maybe he'd have 0.25 of a yard more for a thing. But if you watch him, there really is nowhere to go on most of those plays. Now, again, I'll take a look at the film afterward, and see if that's been true on a week by week basis or if it's something with Bryce. But I suspect that that's more of just an offensive line thing. With Cook, kind of even the first, because you remember, Bryce got off to a pretty good start in terms of getting a lot of these big rushes. That was when AVT was still in the lineup. And their run blocking was still pretty decent. And it sort of looked for a period of time like they could sort of win the way they won last year, where they could rely on, early in the year, rely on running the ball, don't throw it that much, feed Bryce, and do things like that. But then when AVT went down and then the rest of the line, McGovern went down, the run blocking just went totally downhill. So it's possible that was just because of the AVT injury also, and that having I do think that having a competent offensive line will re-unlock Bryce, but the thing is Cook looked bad even in those games. So he's washed. I mean, I think the Jets everyone knows he's not coming back next year, and it's just it's a lost season. So the fact that they had Dalvin Cook as part of the lost season, okay, it is what it is.
Let him cook? ? That take is
someone will give him $1 million or $2 to or even a few million. Look, they signed Ezekiel Elliott after he had some pretty lackluster seasons behind that Dallas offensive line. Someone will give Cook something.
There you go. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to those tweets. I'll save them in the drafts for now. Maybe at some time I can bring them back in the future. Probably not. All right. Well, let's get into it, Rivka, because you mentioned it here. So there has been a breath throughout much of the season that the Jets would give a pass to everybody, basically, with the Aaron Rodgers injury. That was kind of the thought very early on in the season. Aaron Rodgers went out. Whole season about Rodgers. Everybody's got to come back. Like, run it back. It would be unfair, basically, was the narrative to not give it a chance. If you don't bring it back or you take some of the pieces away, who knows what really happens. But as some of these losses have piled up, Jets losing 6 of their last 7 games, and in the fashion that they did in this Dolphins game, just appeared very lifeless, very lackluster, which is, again, an onus to coaching, and they've been lack of preparedness and lack of first quarter action, all that jazz. So anywho, we get to this. Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh, Nathaniel Hackett. There's a big group there. And Rodgers, of course, who's already really committed to coming back. Will they come back? Just straight up, do you believe, will they or won't they? And should they or shouldn't they? I don't know if those answers are different for you.
So will they? I think the answer has to be yes over there, because this Jets organization has clearly made themselves a slave to Rodgers. So if he wants Douglas and Saleh back, Douglas and Saleh will be back. Hackett's not even a question, which is like I think one of the worst sentences that has ever come out of my mouth, sports related. I mean, I did not like Paul Hackett. Paul Hackett was the offensive coordinator my first year as a full-time Jets fan. I believe they fired him after the season because that's when Mike Heimerdinger came in 2005. So I did not like his father. He makes his father look like Andy Reid. Seriously. So I've been saying that over and over. I'm not kidding. That's just the reality. He's so bad. The thing is, I think Rodgers likes him because he's like, okay, he'll let me change the whole offense, so I can just call my own plays. So yeah, if you're calling your own whole offense, then what do you need an offensive coordinator for? I think the thing is, I think Douglas and Saleh will both be back. I don't like it. I'll tell you the truth. People have accused me of being a Saleh hater because I've made comments. I've been heavily critical of him at times. Now, I also wrote an article giving him credit at several times. I gave him credit for developing Quincy Williams. I've given him credit for many other things on the Jets, the way they structure their defense. Even though I've had a lot of issues with it, ultimately I see that they've done a good job with it. The thing about Saleh at this point is just, Robbie Sabo has said this several times. He said Saleh's mentality is play the game and win, 20-17. That's what he wants. He wants to win tight games, play a war of attrition, and that's just not how today's NFL works. Like that, maybe that worked when the '85 Bears were out there, or even the 2000 Ravens, even the 2015 Broncos managed it. But first of all, the Jets defense is not as good as any of those defenses. And second of all, again, in today's NFL, it doesn't work, especially when you're playing a team with an offense like the Dolphins. And so it's just the conservative mindset. The Jets offense is back in the 1960s, but it's not just because of Hackett. It's because of Saleh also. And just this whole mentality of don't make mistakes and just run, pass. it's so far in the past, but he can't break that mentality. It's unbelievable that he and Mike McDaniel were on the same team at one point, because McDaniel I understand that Saleh was a defensive guy, but McDaniel just comes from a totally different cloth, and even Mike LaFleur did to a large extent. Look, I criticized him last year so much. I advocated for the Jets to get rid of him, even when other people were saying that he would just be made into a scapegoat. But again, even Mike LaFleur makes Nathaniel Hackett makes Mike LaFleur look like Andy Reid. I mean, you just look at some of the things that LaFleur did last year. Yes, it wasn't very successful, but he tried. Hackett doesn't even try. So for that reason, I'm an advocate for firing Saleh, hiring the Lions offensive coordinator as their head coach.
Oh,
and
Ben
then
Johnson.
It kills two birds with one stone, because then Hackett doesn't get removed as offensive coordinator, but Johnson gets to call the plays. And so it's sort of like a Green Bay situation all over again.
Interesting. All right. Well, that is muy caliente. Very spicy there for it. I wonder to see what will actually happen, because my fear is, especially the fear was with the initial Zach Wilson pop last week against the Texans. Jets go, oh, haha, we were right. All right, he's QB2 again. Let's run it back. Rodgers potentially gets hurt again. Okay, Zach Wilson, he's certainly ready this time. 1,000%. We are totally in on this. And then he's not. Then we have the whole season again. So that could be a level of concerning, but that could be interesting if old Ben Johnson is going to get a lot of love out there potentially. So we'll see. For that to happen, do the Jets have to lose out? Does it have to be an embarrassing game or two for that to become a reality? What has to happen to get us there? To finish this off?
I was saying already before the Texans game that I wanted the Jets to lose out in ugly fashion, because it would force them to take a long, hard look in the mirror, as opposed to kind of just chalking everything up to Rodgers and injuries. And I maintain that. I mean, unfortunately, that may not be the case because they're playing the Commanders, although the Commanders are capable of piling up the points. They also have a terrible secondary. And, I doubt that they're actually going to get blown out. But again, ugly. If they lose to the Patriots in that last game by more than one touchdown, I mean, look, it would be devastating, but I think it would just be symbolic of this whole Jets. And, look, they lost, they went on a season-ending losing streak last year. This year, they beat the Texans, but really it probably would have been best for them to end the season on a 10-game losing streak, and to just realize, like, even if they don't get rid of Saleh and Douglas, let's say they felt completely stuck with Rodgers. And let's say they felt completely stuck with Rodgers, and they decided to keep everyone. They would make legitimate changes because they would realize this is our last shot. And for this commenter who said that I should be the Jets GM, I appreciate the comment. I am not nearly good enough with the salary cap and understanding how to integrate different parts of the cap to be a general manager. And I also don't have enough talent evaluation. See, that's me saying I know my limitations. Doesn't seem like some in the Jets organization do that. I'm by the way, that was not a shot on Douglas. That was a shot at his scouting. Because I'm very unimpressed with the consistency of their poor free agency evaluation. It's been atrocious. So that was mainly a shot at that, but I know that I don't have that capability.
Yeah, I would just use not that I quite often quote the Three Musketeers, but I'm kind of all for one for all here as it pertains to any firing possibly. Either get rid of the whole ship, see you Douglas, see you Saleh. I'm not for getting rid of one and not the other. I just feel like that creates an imbalance. You have to have conviction with the decision. If you're going to run this back, okay, Jet fans, buckle your seatbelts. Hopefully they improve everything they need to and they run it back fully. Or they blow it up and say, Rodgers, we're getting you some new guys in here. These guys suck. So we're going to get you some new guys. So let's make a crazy run for it. I think that's the only decision that the Jets can make. So we'll see if they take my advice.
I agree with you. I would say that firing, let's say, because it seems that more people are calling for Saleh's head than Douglas's. I think the Jets fan base, Douglas built up a lot of capital with the Jets fan base because of the 2022 draft.
Yeah.
So people give him a longer leash. It's Saleh that's really getting the wrath. I would agree that they should either do everyone or no one. I lean towards everyone. That's my preference. But let's say firing Saleh and not Douglas would be like firing what the Jets did with Idzik and Rex Ryan and Tannenbaum. It's just in the reverse way, right? They kept the head coach. They changed the GM, totally not on the same page. And, you know, it led to Rex getting fired shortly thereafter because it was just a blanket disaster. Douglas does not have as much credit built up with me as he does with many other Jets fans, because I just look at it and I say, other than that 2022 draft, take out, you know, obviously Sauce and Garrett, and you can never take away credit because there have been many teams that made multiple first-round picks and botched them up. So you have to give credit over there, especially Jermaine Johnson has looked much better this year. He really looks like he's going to be a stalwart, which, again, I'm pulling a bit of a mea culpa on that one too, because I just never thought he would develop as a pass rusher. Meaning, I thought he'd always be good against the run, but I never really thought he'd develop as a pass rusher. Credit also to Saleh and Douglas or Saleh and Ulbrich for using him in different places all over the place and unlocking his potential that way, standing him up, things like that. But, you know, other than that, if you look at his decisions, you look at his drafting, I mean, everyone was trying to hold out hope for the 2020 draft and say, if Becton works out, it'll all work out. Look, I don't know where you are on that page, but I've been a very outspoken critic of Becton this entire season. So, you know, I wrote yesterday that no team should sign him for more than $2 million. So I'm really off the Becton train. And to me, obviously, again, you can blame his injuries for what has happened with him, but ultimately the issues you see with his footwork, the issues you see with his hand placement were always there. It's just now he's been sapped of his power, so now you just see a tackle who has no proficiency whatsoever. But you look at his 2020 draft, you look at his 2021 draft. Again, he got Michael Carter, the cornerback, who incidentally is another guy the Jets are going to have to think about extending sooner rather than later, since he's heading into the final year of his deal. But I see we both have the kids. The kids right around. So, but then other than that, you look at his free agency, you look at his different stuff. He just hasn't done a good job. And if they're going to fire Saleh, they need to fire Douglas also. Look, the only question I have with Douglas really is, who are you going to bring in that's better? I don't know the answer to that question. I thought Douglas was a good hire, so I'm helpless at this point for that. Look, I look at the Giants, and I really thought that the Joe Shane and Brian Dable combination was a great hire. And then in the first year, you know, they're doing all great, and everyone's like, everything's hunky dory. And this year, everything fell apart, and there were so many questions about that organization. And so it just kind of teaches you about how fickle the whole coach GM thing is. But by the same token, the Jets are. Douglas has been here for four off seasons now. How many
5 years. Yeah.
How many GMs get a fifth year to put their stamp on an organization when their winning percentage is .281?
It's a fair question. So Rivka wants blood in the streets. Let's dance. Let's dance, everybody. Let's dance with blood in the streets. I think that may be the proper option for the New York Jets. I think that may be the path to go. We'll see if that indeed does happen. The playoffs are over, but we're making a crazy chase to see drafting and all that jazz, and we'll see what happens. Happy holidays, Rivka, if I don't talk to you before Christmas and everything else. So God bless to you and yours running around over there. Blessed be he that we have these wonderful children. So amazing. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon, hopefully.
Okay.
Not too long in between next time.
Yes, exactly. Okay, take care. Have a good one.
All right, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 7:30. Take care.